I was walking through a cold hospital room. There were covered bodies everywhere and a strange smell. Another turn, and here is the office I needed. I went inside, nodded to the head doctor, and confidently put the envelope with the money on the table. For this, he grinned and handed me a bundle of death and adoption papers. Great. I quickly left the hospital, got into the car, and soon I was in the building of the Social Assistance Fund. A client was waiting for me there. I gave her the documents, and a few minutes later, she came back and handed me an envelope with the money. Wow, it was a real dream job. My scheme works like this. I buy documents for conditionally dead children. They either went missing or ran away from the orphanage and were not found. And then I pass them off as living, having forged documents. I sell these documents to clients, and the state pays them cash benefits for allegedly adopted children, and I get a good percentage. Many people would judge me, but I'm not ashamed. The thing is, my dad died a few years ago. All my life, my father honestly worked for the state to feed us, but he got cancer. He needed an expensive surgery, but the state didn't give us a cent. We had no mother and then our dad died. So I decided, if the authorities didn't care about my family, then I was not going to live according to their laws. And soon I learned that the state pays a considerable amount for the adoption of a child. That's when I came up with the scam. I found lists of children who were already formally dead and quickly adopted several dead people. However, I quickly realized that I could not adopt all the children myself. The civil services might suspect something, but I could not give up the gold mine. I started looking for girls who were willing to line their pockets from it. And so, after another transaction, I was driving home with a wad of money. I'm going to be a millionaire so soon. When I pulled up to my cottage, I saw a cop standing at the door. He was holding the hand of some dirty boy. Might have got the wrong house. But when the police officer saw me, he asked for my name, was happy, and said that the patrol had found my son Peter at the border. I didn't understand anything, but then I remembered among my first adoptees was a certain Peter. He was listed as missing. But my friend, the head doctor, easily made documents for him. I pretended that everything was fine and overcame my disgust for the ragamuffin, took his hand, and with a forced smile, began to thank the policeman for his help. After that, I quickly pushed my pseudo-son into the house and began to find out what he wanted from me. Why the hell did he resurrect? But little Pete said he wasn't happy to see me either. It turned out that 6 months ago, he ran away from the orphanage to go to friends in Mexico. He would have been there by now, but they got him. I got into trouble. I needed to get rid of him as soon as possible. So, orphanages, border guards, and everyone else love money. It should work. I took a pack out of the safe and shoved it at Pete. Give it to the border guards and keep it for yourself, of course. But Pete said that the bribe was a lame plan, and that he needed an adult to help him officially cross the border. What a smart ass. I wanted to throw him out of the door, but he seemed to know. I wasn't telling him something. He said that if I refused to help him, he would tell the policeman that I was not his foster mother. Little bugger. I tried to calm him down. I didn't want to go to jail. All right. I'll take him to the border quickly and straight back. With a sigh, I went back to the car and got behind the wheel. Pete jumped into the next seat and we drove off. To get rid of the kid as quickly as possible, I decided to take the shortcut to the border and drove through the canyon. Pete didn't say a word the whole way. I was surprised. Could children be so calm? I was also silent. What should I talk about with the kid? And then when we were passing by the canyon, I heard a strange sound and the car started to shake. I slowed down, then got out of the car. Damn it. The right wheel was broken. I wanted to call a tow truck, but there was no network. Stupid canyon. But there had to be a town ahead. We left the car and walked down the highway. Pete wanted to support me, but I told him to shut up. It was all his fault. After an hour, I was terribly tired, my body ached, and I was terribly thirsty from the stiffness. It was late in the afternoon when we arrived at a miserable little town that looked more like a village. I hoped there was somewhere to stay for the night. I told Pete I'd pay for our hotel room, and in the morning, we would go to the border by the first bus. I started to look for my wallet, but then I realized I'd left it in the car. This was the last straw. Where were we going to sleep now? I didn't have the strength anymore, so I sat down on the ground and started crying. Pete called me a wimp and went to the nearest house to ask for a place to sleep. God, how humiliating. I'm not going to be a beggar. but it was already dark and I was getting cold. I had to split on my pride and go after Pete. We knocked on all the houses, and finally we were lucky. An old woman let us spend the night in her hut. And how miserable it was. Shabby walls all around us, and there was not even a bed in the room. It's just like when I was a kid. My dad worked like hell to provide for us, but we still lived in a poor shack. I lay down on the floor, but I couldn't sleep. Pete glared at me as I tossed and turned. And then he was gone. Hey, where are you going, kid? He came back a few minutes later with a couple of sacks and some hay, explaining that he had taken them in the old woman's barn. Pete hastily filled the bags and put them on the floor, saying that it would be more convenient for us. Wow, this Pete was a handy guy. Pete admitted that he would like to live like a normal teenager, but there was no help within reach. His words passed through me, just as I had thought after my father's death. Surprisingly, I had something in common with this boy. I immediately fell asleep on the soft mat, but after a couple of hours, I felt someone shaking my shoulder. What's wrong? Pete explained that we were late for the bus. The owner of the hut said that it was leaving in less than an hour. Oh shit! We ran through the city. I had never run so fast in my life. But then a bus stop appeared in the distance, and next to it was a clunker that looked like a truck. It turned out that the locals considered it a bus. The back of the truck was already packed to the brim, with chicken cages, mixed in with people. There's no way I was going. But Pete cheerfully climbed into the back of the truck and held out his hand, and he said that there was no other way out. Heck. Holding my nose, I climbed into the truck, and with a huge crash, we went along the highway. It was terrible to ride in the back of the truck. We were bouncing along on every bump, and a suffocating stench was coming from the chickens. Peter tried to distract me and started telling me stories about his escape. At first, I didn't want to listen to this nonsense, but Pete was joking, and how could he not be embittered by such a hard life? I supported him and told him about my dad, and how cruelly he had been treated by the government. Peter listened sympathetically, and at some point, I even felt relieved. Finally, someone understood me. Maybe not all children in the world were so terrible. Then I noticed that the shaggy man was looking at me impudently. He caught my eye and paid me a vulgar compliment. How dare he? I immediately told him off. But the brute was furious. The man began to approach me. Hey, that's enough. We were going so fast that it was impossible to jump off, and the nasty bumpkin already stretched out his dirty hands to me. This was the end. But suddenly Pete stood between us and asked the man to leave me alone, and in one motion, he knocked him down. I was shocked. How did he know such techniques? Pete replied that the orphanage had taught him to stand up for himself. Wow, this guy would be fine, but at the same time, I realized that this boy didn't seem to have a normal childhood at all. Suddenly, the truck braked sharply and all the passengers fell to the floor. What happened? Then an angry driver came up to us and told Pete and me to get out of the truck. Wait, we were defending ourselves, but the village driver didn't care. He got back behind the wheel and drove off quickly, leaving us in some backwater. I was desperate. How are we going to get to the border now? But then I noticed a sign. It turned out that it was only a couple of miles away. Pete cheered up and said that his friends in Mexico were probably waiting for him. With the last of our strength, we trudged forward along the road. At one of the turns, we saw some skinny children in ragged clothes. I tried to turn away, but suddenly I was thinking I'd always been annoyed by these kids before. But now I suddenly felt painfully sorry for them. I went up to them and asked them where their parents were. One boy replied in a weak voice that there were no parents. They were all orphans. I was like being stabbed with a dagger. Thanks to the scams, I quickly became rich. But in the end, I spent everything on some trinkets. But this money could help other children who had more problems than I had. Take Peter at least. Then I looked back and realized that Pete had disappeared. Where the hell could he have gone? In a panic, I asked the guys, did they see where he ran? But they just shrugged their shoulders. I ran on, trying to find out from the occasional passerby if they'd seen Pete. And suddenly a local remembered that he had seen a boy captured by Big Man on the local gang. God, it could be Pete. He pointed to an abandoned shack deep in the canyon. The gang's lair. Most likely, he was dragged there. Before I could finish listening, I rushed there and round around the shack on all sides. In one of the windows, I saw Pete. He was already being approached by some beefy types with batons. Oh shit! I hesitated. I didn't have to risk my life for Pete because he wasn't my son. But he had done so much for me. And now he was in trouble. Why was I standing? I had to act quickly. In a desperate rush, I jumped through the window and pushed one of the jocks standing at the entrance. Run, Pete! Pete took advantage of the moment and immediately ran for the door. I ran after him, but one of the big guys grabbed me. And then I saw Pete. He quickly hit the big guy with a board and we ran away as fast as we could. In the evening, we continued our way to the border, and here we were. Finally, there was an awkward pause as Pete looked down, embarrassed, and thanked me for my help. And I suddenly realized that I didn't want to break up. I had become so attached to Pete during this time. I hugged him tenderly and burst into tears. We had been through so much together. Pete almost seemed to be crying too. But we both knew that any journey always comes to an end. I watched Pete go until he was out of sight. I hoped that everything would be fine for him, and he would definitely be happy. It was time for me to get back into my life. And I thought how to change it now. I got home safely. There was a lot of money in the safe. But I wasn't happy about it anymore. I felt more alone than ever. Suddenly, someone rang the doorbell. Could it be Peter? I suddenly thought, and I was glad of this thought and ran to the door. But it was just a delivery guy. And then an idea came to me. And what if I adopted a child? Only this time, they would be very much alive. Did you like the video? Subscribe and like it. Support the channel. Thank you.